It was one of those raw, grey mornings when the fog comes up from the river and presses a damp hand upon the window panes, making London seem to breathe in thick, reluctant sighs. Dr. Watson, who had slept ill owing to a racking east wind and a persistent draught beneath the scullery door, found Mr. Sherlock Holmes at the breakfast table in Baker Street with the remains of a singularly neglected meal before him and a telegram laid open on the white cloth like a freshly drawn blade. Holmes's long forefinger rested upon the flimsy paper. "A curious summons, Watson," said he without looking up. "The sea has sent for us." Watson drew his chair nearer and read, "Trinity House requests your immediate counsel. North Foreland light extinguished. During night, keeper found dead in lantern room, door fastened within, Fresnel lens undamaged, no means of entry apparent. Police at a loss. Please come. Sir Jasper Armitage, elder brother." Holmes's lip took on that faintest hum of amusement which Watson knew usually signified a mind already moving along invisible grooves. When the beacon that should guide ships through peril goes dark for 7 minutes, and the man who tends it is found dead behind a fastened door, even the stoutest insurance office will begin to perspire. "Good heavens!" cried Watson. "A locked-room death in a lantern tower, and at North Foreland of all places! The traffic through the Downs, why, if it were more than 7 minutes—" "7 minutes would suffice to change a safe landfall into guesswork for a ship running before the wind," said Holmes. "They have been fortunate or very prudent. There is no mention of a wreck." Before Watson could frame a question, Mrs. Hudson announced Sir Jasper Armitage, who entered as if he brought the Channel weather with him. He was a powerful man, ruddy-faced, with the cold bloom of sea air in his cheeks and a damp sheen upon his whiskers. His black coat bore the pitted evidence of recent drizzle, and he held his hat with a grip that made the brim groan. "Mr. Holmes," he began, "I beg you to forgive this early hour and the urgency of my appeal. I come from the house on Tower Hill. We have a dead keeper at North Foreland, Kent. James Cutter, our principal man, was found at dawn upon the iron grating of the lantern room, his body lying against the rail, his keys in his pocket, the door bolted upon the inside with the drop bolt we employ against gusts. The light was out for a brief interval, some 7 minutes by the assistant's watch, during the worst of last night's squall. When it returned, it burned steady. At daybreak, they forced the door. Cutter was beyond human aid. Holmes waved him to a chair. "Pray sit, Sir Jasper, and give us the particulars. You say we forced the door, then you were there yourself?" "I took the early train after receiving the night signal," said Sir Jasper. "Inspector Lestrade met me at Margate. We went out together at first light." "Inspector Lestrade?" Holmes's eyebrows mounted by a hair's breadth. "Then Scotland Yard has already had a finger in the pie." Sir Jasper's jaw tightened. "To little purpose. If a man may perish in a room of glass and iron 60 feet above the sea, with one exit secured from within, and a ladder that rings like a bell at every tread, and if no stranger has set foot upon the causeway since the tide turned, then I confess I do not know how we are to keep our mariners safe." Watson, who had attended enough of the great man's cases to feel when a knot was tied tight, could not restrain himself. "Was there violence, Sir Jasper? A wound?" "That is the devil of it, Doctor. There is no mark of knife or bullet, no bruise save a small contusion over the right temple, no more than a man might take from the corner of a brass strut if he stumbled. Yet Cutter's face—" He paused, as if ashamed of the word that rose to his lips. It was as though he had been frightened in the instant and never breathed again. "Fright seldom stops the heart of a keeper who has weathered 20 winters," Holmes murmured. "What of the lamp apparatus?" "Untouched. The lens is a third-order Fresnel, bright as a bishop's conscience. The mantle was intact, the oil feed proper. The ventilators in the canopy were open, as they should be in rough weather, and there was no smell of smoke when we entered, only a faint odour of tar, perhaps. I am no chemist. Tide conditions? Springs, a heavy run with a cap of foam on every breaker. The causeway was awash half the night. No boat could have landed save a foolhardy one, and the keepers would have heard her long before she bumped their stones. Holmes's gaze, which had been fixed upon some point in the skirting board, sharpened. You mentioned an interval, 7 minutes, when the light failed. Yes. The assistant, a young fellow named Hobbs, was trimming the wick in the service room 1 story below. He swears he did not leave his post. He noticed the beam flicker and die. He called up the stair, but received no answer. Before he could mount, the light returned. He feared to abandon his station in a squall. At dawn, when the duty changed, Cutter failed to descend. And the second assistant? On the lower floor, with the diaphone, he reports nothing but the wind. Holmes steepled his fingers. To sum up, a man dies in a room from which there is no egress without alarm, a light goes out and returns without human aid, and 3 men who should have been together are each in his proper place, like pieces on a chessboard. He smiled very slightly. It is a composed tableau, Sir Jasper, almost too composed. Sir Jasper thrust a hand into his inner pocket and drew out a small twist of tissue paper. There is one trifle more, Mr. Holmes. We found this on the inner rail of the lantern gallery, just beside Cutter's hand. He unrolled it to reveal 2 minute flakes of black, glossy substance, and a splinter not unlike the charred end of a match, only the head was of a curious greenish cast. Holmes leaned forward. That is not the common safety match, Watson. Note the hue. And the flakes. Sealing wax, I think, though why there should be black wax upon the rail of a lantern open to all winds. By heaven, cried Sir Jasper, I said the same. We seldom seal anything at the light. Unless a man sealed what he wished to keep the wind from touching, Holmes replied. Sir Jasper, if we are to be of use, we must go at once. Tell me only this. Who besides the keepers had business upon the rock within the last week? Sir Jasper counted upon his fingers. Myself, a Trinity House inspector named Varley, a tinsmith out of Broadstairs regarding a rattle in the ventilator cowling, and— he hesitated— and Mr. Horace Belchamber of the Anglo-Caledonian line. One of his vessels, a cattle boat, touched ground off the Goodwins last month and sent him into a fever about our signals. He is a generous donor and an intolerable meddler. Holmes rose with that alacrity which always reminded Watson of a violin string brought to perfect pitch. Watson, your hat. The air of Baker Street offends me already. Sir Jasper, if Lestrade will not object to competent assistance, you may inform him that we shall share the next train. Pray keep the flakes precisely as they are, and on no account permit any sweeping of that lantern floor. The smallest smear upon iron may be a sentence written in the clearest hand. Sir Jasper stood, relief, struggling with the weight of his responsibility. You give me hope, Mr. Holmes. I give you nothing but attention, Sir Jasper, said Holmes. It is the world that gives us its puzzles. We are merely careful to see where it has left its thumb upon the glass. As the hall door closed behind their visitor, Holmes looked once more at the telegram. The fog outside leaned against the window like a curious face. A lamp that dies and lives again, a dead man without a wound, and a rail that has been kissed by black wax, he murmured. Watson, the sea is an untidy murderer, but this is not the sea's work. Come, there is salt upon the wind, and answers in the iron room above it. The morning express carried us swiftly out of the choking London fog into the damp green of the Kentish coast. Holmes, who had exchanged his usual languid posture for a restless energy, scarcely spoke during the journey. He sat with his sharp profile turned toward the window, his eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Yet one could almost hear the wheels of his mind clattering more busily than those of the train. From time to time he fingered the paper twist of wax flakes that Sir Jasper had left with him, as though the fragile relic might of itself yield a confession. For my part, I confess that I was deeply stirred. The image of the lantern-room, high above the restless channel, a faithful servant of seamen suddenly extinguished and its solitary guardian struck down by some invisible hand, had impressed me as few of Holmes's cases had ever done. It was not merely murder, it was a kind of profanation. The lighthouse stood as the sentinel of life, and for it to harbour death within its glass crown seemed monstrous in the extreme. At Canterbury we changed to a branch line, and from thence travelled in a hired fly through sodden fields until the sea spread itself before us in ragged grey and white. The towers of Northforeland rose from the headland like gaunt sentinels, their lantern tops barely visible through the lingering mist. Sir Jasper met us at the foot of the cliff, accompanied by Inspector Lestrade, whose expression betrayed little of the welcome one might extend to a valued ally. "You have come promptly enough, Mr. Holmes," said Lestrade with forced civility, "though I am not sure what more can be made of it. The man is dead of natural causes, say I, a seizure, perhaps. These keepers are a hardy breed, but the lamp-room is a stifling place. A touch of the heart and down he goes, nothing criminal in that." Holmes regarded him with a smile as chill as the sea wind. "A seizure, my dear Lestrade, does not bolt a door upon the inside nor scatter sealing wax upon a gallery rail." "Let us at least look before we close our ledger." We mounted the causeway at the lull of the tide, spray hissing against the stone. The iron ladder clanged beneath our boots as we ascended. The assistant keeper, Hobbs, awaited us above, a lanky, fair-haired youth with eyes still large from the shock of his ordeal. His speech trembled as he recounted the events of the night. Yet I could not detect the false note of invention. He pointed out the grating upon which Cutter had fallen, still dark with the shadow of his last posture. Holmes crouched examining the bolts of the inner door, the brass struts and the ventilators above. He tapped the iron with a fingernail, sniffed the air, then rose abruptly and paced the circular gallery. He paused by the rail where Sir Jasper had indicated the wax had been found. There he took out his lens and inspected the painted iron with the minuteness of a jeweller examining a flawed stone. "Watson, observe," said he at last, beckoning me closer. "Do you see these faint abrasions upon the paint, no broader than a hair? A man's sleeve could not have made them. Something harder, metal perhaps, has rubbed here and, recently, and here again, on the outer edge, the faintest droplet of congealed tar. Our seaman's nose did not deceive him." Lestrade snorted. "Tar? And what of it? Any sailor's boots might carry a smear from the quay." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Indeed, Lestrade, yet what sailor has climbed to this lantern in the past week, save those whose names Sir Jasper has furnished? We shall remember this blemish, for it may yet tell us who dared." He turned to Hobbs with sudden briskness. "You say the light went out entirely, then returned as strong as before. Did you hear any unusual sound above?" "Only the wind, sir, and the creak of the frame." "No cry from Mr. Cutter. He was steady as a rock, always. I swear he made no step nor groan." Holmes inclined his head gravely, then descended to the service room 1 story below. There he examined the oil feed, the wick trimmer, and the mechanism that revolved the lens. He handled every lever and cog with the caress of a surgeon at his instruments. When he straightened, his face bore the calm of one who has marked some private note in the score. "Watson," he murmured, "you remarked upon the profanation of extinguished light. Consider rather the purpose, to darken the sea for those who watched from without, if only for a handful of minutes. Ask yourself why, and for whom, that darkness might serve." Sir Jasper overheard him and blanched. "Good Lord, you mean to say the light was put out by design? Then Cutter—" "Cutter may have stood in the path of a greater intention," said Holmes. "But let us not outrun ourselves. Tell me, Sir Jasper, of this Mr. Horace Belchamber, who has taken so pointed an interest in your affairs." The elder brother's brow darkened. A shipping magnate of the loudest voice and most meddlesome habits. He lost a cargo vessel on the Goodwins last month, though all hands were saved, and has since plagued us with complaints of negligence. He came here uninvited 3 days past, to inspect the light and berate poor Cutter until the man was near fit to strike him. I was absent, alas, or I should have taught Belchamber a different tune. Holmes's gaze wandered once more to the wax flakes preserved in their paper. A man who meddles in lighthouses may meddle also with sealing wax. I think we must pay Mr. Belchamber a call before this day is much older. As we descended once more to the causeway, the wind freshened, carrying the salt sting of the Channel full upon us. I saw Holmes's eyes narrow against it, not in discomfort, but in concentration. He walked ahead with the springing step of a man who scents the trail of his quarry. Lestrade, trudging at my side, muttered sourly, "Mark my words, Doctor, he'll spin us a fine web out of tar and candle ends, and at the end we shall still have a dead man of natural causes, you'll see." But I, who had long since ceased to measure Holmes's deductions by ordinary standards, felt within me the stirring of certainty that the strange death in the lantern-room was no accident. Whatever shadow had crossed that iron floor in the storm would not elude the relentless light of Holmes's reason. The carriage that bore us toward Broadstairs jolted and rattled over the uneven road, its windows flecked with spray from the restless sea. Holmes sat opposite me, his hat pulled low, his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm upon the polished cane that lay across his knees. Sir Jasper rode beside the driver, anxious to hasten our arrival, while Lestrade maintained a brooding silence, his face half lost in the collar of his greatcoat. For my own part, I could not shake the image of the lighthouse's iron chamber, the still form of Cutter upon the grating, the lantern that had flickered and died like a great eye, momentarily blinded. The memory clung to me with an unease I could not wholly define. Holmes at last broke the silence. "Watson, recall the abrasion upon the rail coupled with the flakes of black wax and the green-headed splinter. What does that suggest to your medical imagination?" I frowned, marshalling my thoughts. The wax might have secured some object to the rail, the splinter. It was as though a match had been struck or perhaps broken. Yet the head was green, which is most uncommon. I can recall no such matches in my practice. "Just so," Holmes said with satisfaction. "We shall confirm the nature of that fragment in due course. But remember, Watson, each anomaly is a voice crying out in the wilderness. Our task is not to silence them, but to listen." Lestrade gave a dry cough. "Voices in sealing wax? Well, Mr. Holmes, I shall be glad to hear what they say when you put them on the witness stand." Holmes regarded him with amusement, but did not reply. The remainder of the journey passed in brooding silence, broken only by the rattle of wheels and the occasional blast of wind off the Channel. Broadstairs proved to be a cheerful little town, its promenade dotted with visitors despite the chill. Sir Jasper guided us through narrow streets until we came upon a handsome red brick house overlooking the sea. The brass plate upon the door gleamed with the name Horace Belchamber, Esq. We were admitted by a butler of frosty demeanour and shown into a drawing-room filled with heavy draperies and the unmistakable odour of expensive cigars. Belchamber himself entered shortly after, a broad man of florid complexion whose gold watch chain strained against his waistcoat. His manner was one of blustering affability that scarcely concealed irritation. "Sir Jasper, Mr. Holmes, gentlemen," he said, bowing stiffly. "I am honoured by your visit, though I suspect you have come with reproaches. If this concerns the unfortunate death of Cutter, I am as distressed as any man. But pray do not imagine that I had aught to do with it. My business is ships, not lighthouses." Holmes inclined his head with politeness, though his eyes never left the man's face. "We come not with reproaches, Mr. Belchamber, but with questions. You were at the Light 3 days since. Might you describe your purpose there?" "To ensure the safety of my fleet," Belchamber replied stoutly. "I have lost one vessel already by reason of negligent signals. Cutter was surly with me, I confess. He resented my interference, but I meant no harm." Holmes's voice was mild. "During your visit, did you chance to carry matches upon your person?" The shipping magnate's brow furrowed. "Matches? Why, yes, of course. Any smoker does. I favour a foreign make, the Swedish kind. They flare strong even in a gale. See here." He produced a small case from his pocket and withdrew a stick with a pale wooden stem and a head of distinct greenish hue. My heart gave a leap as Holmes received it delicately between thumb and forefinger. "Precisely," said he softly. "Swedish Vesuvs. They burn hotter than our English safety matches and leave a telltale residue. And tell me, Mr. Belchamber, when you struck one of these in the lantern room, what did you observe?" Belchamber started. "How the deuce do you know that I—" "Well, since you press me, I did indeed light one to examine a suspected flaw in the glass. Cutter objected, saying I endangered the wick. I admit I may have dropped the thing in my vexation, but surely, Mr. Holmes, you do not suspect me of murder on such grounds?" Holmes smiled thinly. "I suspect nothing. I merely collect." He slipped the match into his case and rose. "You will forgive our intrusion, Mr. Belchamber. We shall not trouble you further at present." As we departed, Lestrade whispered at my elbow with smug triumph, "You see, Doctor, it was no more than a dropped match after all. A trifling circumstance explained in a trice. Cutter's death remains natural, and your friend may chase shadows to his heart's content." Holmes, however, walked briskly ahead, his face alight with suppressed excitement. "Watson," he murmured once we were beyond earshot, "you perceive how swiftly the pieces fall when pressed. The match confirms our wax, the wax suggests attachment, and the attachment, there lies the crux. What, pray, was so vital that a man risked darkening the downs to affix it to the rail? And why should Cutter die in the moment of its contrivance?" I ventured. "Do you imply that some signal was shown? A light to the sea, visible only in the instant the great lamp was quenched?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "My dear fellow, you outstrip even yourself. Yes, a signal, fleeting, perilous, but sufficient for eyes that waited. What if a ship lurked beyond the good winds, needing but a clandestine mark to guide her through forbidden waters? And what if Cutter, loyal to his charge, perceived the act and paid with his life?" The chill that ran through me at these words was not due to the sea air alone. "Then we are dealing with conspirators of no mean ambition." "Indeed," Holmes replied gravely, "and it is to the Goodwins we must next direct our thoughts. A vessel waits, or has waited, in the offing. Whether for smuggling or darker enterprise, I cannot yet say. But the lantern room has spoken, and we must heed it. Sir Jasper turned in astonishment. You believe Cutter was slain to protect some signal to the sea? This is grave beyond measure. I shall place the Coast Guard on immediate alert. Holmes raised a hand. No rash steps, I beg. If we stir the waters too soon, the fish will vanish. Let us instead consult the assistant keepers again. They may have noted some fleeting gleam or cry amidst the storm. And then, Watson, I think a discreet excursion along the shore may reveal who watched the lighthouse that night. The day was waning as we retraced our way toward the headland. The sea, restless and dark, beat its eternal rhythm against the cliffs. I felt as though some immense design was unfolding beyond our vision, its threads knotted within the iron tower we had left behind. Holmes's pace quickened as the lighthouse loomed once more against the stormy sky. He was a hound upon the scent, and I, faithful though bewildered, followed where his genius led. The wind had risen by the time we regained the causeway, blowing with a mournful voice through the iron struts of the tower and sending plumes of spray high into the air. The keepers awaited us in the lower chamber, their faces drawn and pale from the strain of long hours without rest. Young Hobbs looked particularly haggard, his eyes shadowed by fear and sleeplessness, while the elder assistant, a square-jawed fellow named Carter, tried to mask his unease with a brusque composure that rang hollow. Holmes, who never wasted a glance where none was needed, addressed them both with the quiet authority that seemed to strip prevarication from men as bark from a tree. "You have already told us of your stations during the night," he began, pacing the narrow chamber. "But I wish you to cast your minds back with the utmost precision. Did you notice any glimmer from the sea during the interval when the light was extinguished? Any sound apart from the wind's clamour?" The two men exchanged uneasy looks. At last, Carter answered, "Sir, I scarce dare mention it, for fear of seeming fanciful. But when the beam failed, I thought I saw, only for an instant, mind you, a flash from the water off to the eastward. Like a lantern waved thrice. I could not swear it. The rain was lashing, and the spray blinding." Holmes's eyes narrowed with interest. "And you, Hobbs?" The younger man shifted nervously. "I thought the same, sir. A greenish flicker, not of our lamp, but lower down. I feared it was my eyes playing tricks. When the beam returned, it was gone." Holmes inclined his head gravely. "Your reluctance to speak does you credit, gentlemen. It is often the faintest perception that proves most vital." He drew from his pocket the match which Belchamber had unwittingly displayed. "Tell me, either of you, have you ever seen a stranger employ such a match within these walls?" Hobbs shook his head, but Carter's brow furrowed. "3 nights ago, sir, when that shipping gentleman came raging about the place, he struck one of those very things on the lantern deck. I told him to mind himself, lest he scorch the wick. He laughed and tossed it over the rail." Holmes's gaze flashed with satisfaction, though he betrayed nothing to the assistants. "That is all I require for the present. Keep watch with diligence, and admit no stranger to this chamber until I return. The wind will serve to sweep away careless footprints on the causeway, but the iron itself may yet speak, if handled wisely." As we descended once more, Sir Jasper's face was troubled. "If both my men perceived signals from the sea, then the matter is darker than I feared. This is no mere folly of a meddlesome merchant. We may be dealing with smugglers, or worse." Holmes paused at the foot of the ladder, his gaze fixed upon the tossing horizon. "You are correct, Sir Jasper. The extinction of the light was contrived to enable a signal, and the wax upon the rail was its medium. Some small device, a lantern shielded against the gale, fixed there in the instant of darkness, could convey more than 100 words to eyes that waited in the offing. Cutter discovered it, and for that discovery he was silenced. But by whom, and to what end, remains our task to untangle." Lestrade gave a short laugh of disbelief. "A lantern affixed in the heart of a storm? Why, it would have been snuffed out in a breath. You weave fine romances, Mr. Holmes." Holmes regarded him coolly. "Yet romances, Lestrade, have their basis in human design. Do you suppose men who traffic with darkness will shrink from a gale? On the contrary, they count upon it to cover their tracks." We set out along the cliff path, the spray dashing in our faces, until Holmes halted where the chalk descended in a steep slope to the shingle. He dropped to one knee, examining the ground with his glass. I saw only a confusion of seaweed and broken shells, but Holmes pointed with his thin finger to a mark half hidden beneath kelp, a deep indentation square at the edges where some heavy chest or crate had rested. "Observe, Watson," he said, "the imprint of iron-bound timber no more than 2 days old. Note how the gravel has compacted. Something of weight was landed here and dragged upward. The tide's wash has effaced the trail, but the mark remains." Sir Jasper stared. "Contraband, without doubt. But who in heaven's name could contrive such work under the very eye of the light?" Holmes rose, brushing sand from his knees. "A man who first darkened that eye, Sir Jasper, a man with knowledge of your keeper's routine, and the boldness to act while their trust was engaged elsewhere. I think our shipping magnate has not told us the whole of his interest in this tower." At that moment, a voice hailed us from the cliff above. It was Hobbs, pale with excitement. "Mr. Holmes, sir, a boat. She is hovering off the headland even now." We hastened back to the height, and sure enough, through the gathering dusk, I discerned a small vessel pitching upon the swell, her sail reefed. Close, her hull painted a dull grey that made her all but invisible against the water. She loitered just beyond the breakers, as though waiting for some unseen summons. Holmes's eyes glittered. "There, Watson! Behold the partner in our drama. She waits for the lantern that shall not come tonight. The game is in hand, but we must play with caution." Sir Jasper clenched his fists. "Shall I summon the Coast Guard and have her seized?" Holmes shook his head. "Not yet. To pounce too soon is to scare the quarry. Let them believe their design proceeds unhindered. Tonight the lantern shall shine without falter, and no wax-born signal shall greet them. Let us see how long they loiter, and whether impatience drives them into rashness." As darkness fell, we returned to the tower. Holmes busied himself with close examination of the lantern fittings, measuring, tapping, and at one point even producing a small vial from his pocket, with which he tested the residue upon the rail. His face remained unreadable, though I knew well the signs of a mind spinning its intricate web. When at last he stepped back, the light from the great lens blazing steadily behind him, he said only, "The piece is a line, Watson. Tomorrow, I think, we must press Mr. Belchamber more firmly. His answers will either entangle him or free him, but in either case the net is closing." We kept vigil through the night, watching as the grey vessel lingered like a phantom upon the dark sea, her position shifting but never straying far. Toward dawn she melted into the mist, leaving no trace but the uneasy knowledge that men moved by secret signals and hidden cargoes had staked their fortunes against the steadfast flame of the lighthouse. Holmes, gaunt from his long watch, yet alight with purpose, turned to me as the sun broke over the horizon. "The night has spoken, Watson. Now it remains for us to give the dawn its due. By this evening, I trust, we shall have drawn our curtain wide enough to expose the hand that struck Cutter down." The morning sun, though pale and watery, brought with it a sense of renewal, as if the sea itself wished to wash away the darkness of the night before. Holmes, however, was unsoftened by the dawn. He stood at the lantern rail, the glass panes throwing fractured light across his lean features, and surveyed the restless horizon with an intensity that made me feel he was reading some cipher written upon the waves. I ventured a remark about breakfast, but he brushed it aside with an impatient gesture, his mind plainly elsewhere. Sir Jasper, wearied by the vigil, had retired to the lower quarters, while Lestrade, who had dozed uneasily in a chair, awoke with a snort. "Well, Mr. Holmes, our phantom ship has vanished. A figment of imagination, perhaps? Cutter died of his own failing heart, and we have wasted a night in cold wind for nothing." Holmes turned upon him with sudden sharpness. "You have eyes, Lestrade, yet you see not. The vessel loitered until the first beams of dawn. Had she sought only shelter, she would have run for Ramsgate or Dover long since. No, she waited for the signal that did not come. Her disappearance proves not our folly, but that our unseen adversaries have been balked, and men balked of their design are dangerous." He descended the iron stair swiftly, and we followed in his wake. In the keeper's room, Hobbs was brewing a pot of strong tea. Holmes addressed him at once. "Hobbs, during the 3 days preceding Cutter's death, did any man besides Mr. Belchamber intrude upon your duties?" The youth hesitated. "There was the tinsmith, sir, come to mend the ventilator cowling. He worked up top with Mr. Cutter for near an hour. A quiet man he was, but thorough." Holmes's brows lifted. "Describe him." "Tallish, stooped in the shoulders, with dark whiskers gone grey. His hands were black with tar, though he said it was from the smithy." Holmes made a note. "And this was 2 days before the tragedy?" "Yes, sir." Holmes dismissed him with a nod, then turned to us. "A tinsmith, a shipping magnate, and a dead keeper, all drawn by a common thread. Watson, the puzzle grows taut." We left the tower and returned to the mainland by midday. At the inn where Sir Jasper had taken rooms, Holmes requested writing materials and dashed off a note, which he dispatched by express messenger. He then announced that we would pay Mr. Belchamber another visit. Lestrade protested, but Holmes ignored him and strode out into the street, his long coat billowing like a banner of resolve. Belchamber received us in his study, where the odour of cigars and brandy was even stronger than before. His manner had lost some of its bluster, replaced by a guarded defensiveness. Holmes wasted no time on pleasantries. "Mr. Belchamber," said he, "you admitted yesterday to striking a match in the lantern room. You omitted, however, to mention that you quarrelled violently with Cutter. Witnesses attest that he threatened to report your intrusion to Trinity House. What say you to that?" Belchamber's ruddy face deepened to crimson. "Cutter was insolent, yes, but I never raised a hand against him. My interest was in safeguarding my ships, nothing more." Holmes's gaze was cold. "Yet Cutter is dead, and you had both motive and opportunity. The wax upon the rail, the green match-head, the smothered light, all point to a signal given or prepared. Explain yourself plainly, sir, for equivocation will serve you ill." Belchamber's great hands gripped the arms of his chair until the knuckles whitened. At length he muttered, "I know nothing of wax or signals. As for the lamp's failure, it was no doing of mine. If you seek smugglers, look to the men of Margate or Deal. They have trafficked these waters since time immemorial." Holmes regarded him a long moment, then with a sudden change of manner turned to leave. "Very well. I shall trouble you no further today." Outside, I pressed him eagerly. "You believe him guilty, Holmes?" Holmes shook his head. "Not guilty, Watson, but evasive. He fears implication, perhaps because his name is already tarnished by misfortune. But his indignation had the ring of truth. No, I think Mr. Belchamber is but a piece upon the board, moved by another hand." We returned to the inn, where Holmes found awaiting him the reply to his earlier note. He tore it open and read with gleaming eyes. As I suspected, the tinsmith, one Jeremiah Ketteridge, has a record with the Customs Office, suspected of collusion with smugglers in Ramsgate 5 years ago, though no conviction was obtained. He vanished thereafter, only to reappear now at the Lantern Tower. A man with knowledge of metalwork, adept at fastening devices under cover of labour. Do you not see, Watson? The wax secured not a lantern, but a shield. A panel to occlude the beam, creating darkness long enough for a signal from without. The revelation struck me with the force of a blow. Then Cutter must have caught him in the act. Precisely. And Ketteridge, cornered, silenced him, whether by blow or by artifice, I have yet to determine. But mark my words, Watson, the vessel we saw waits upon further instruction. Tonight, if the pattern holds, some attempt will be made anew. Sir Jasper, who had overheard, rose with clenched fists. Then we must act at once. Shall I summon the constabulary and arrest this rogue? Holmes's expression was grave. No, Sir Jasper. To seize him prematurely is to lose the greater prize. We must contrive to catch not the pawn, but the hand that directs him. Therefore tonight we set our own signal, a snare baited with their own design. The hours that followed passed with a tension that pressed upon me like the weight of the sea. Holmes paced ceaselessly, his gaze far inward, while I tried in vain to steady my nerves with pen and paper. At dusk we returned once more to the lighthouse, where Hobbs and Carter awaited us anxiously. Holmes issued quiet instructions, placing each of us as though upon a chessboard, every move calculated. As the storm gathered again, the lantern burned steadfastly above us, its beam slicing through the darkness. Holmes stood by the rail, his eyes fixed on the restless sea. "Watson," he whispered, "by this time tomorrow the truth shall stand revealed, but tonight we must be watchful. The enemy believes the lantern their ally. We shall make it their undoing." The air was charged with expectation, as though the very stones of the tower held their breath. Somewhere out upon the black water, unseen eyes waited for the signal that would not come. And we, huddled within the iron chamber, braced ourselves for the move that would bring the unseen hand into the light. The wind freshened as night closed in upon the headland, and the steady beam of the lantern cut a white path across the heaving waters. The tower trembled faintly beneath the force of the gale, its iron struts groaning like the timbers of a ship. Within, Holmes moved with a quiet purpose that belied the tension of the hour. He examined once more the bolts of the lantern door, the gallery rail where the wax traces had been found, and the service machinery that drove the lens. His fingers lingered over each detail with the precision of a surgeon ensuring his instruments were flawless before an operation. Sir Jasper kept a nervous watch at the seaward windows, his bulk ill at ease in the confined chamber. Lestrade, by contrast, sat huddled in a chair, his coat collar turned high, his expression betraying impatience. "If you expect this rogue tinsmith to climb the tower in such weather, Holmes, you'll wait till kingdom come," he muttered. Holmes made no reply. He had taken from his pocket a small glass vial and was rubbing a residue upon the rail with a scrap of cloth, his expression unreadable. At last he straightened, his thin face catching the glow of the lamp. "Watson," he said quietly, "do you recall the odour we noticed upon entering the lantern room that first morning? A faint tang of tar, not belonging to the place." "I do indeed," I answered. Holmes tapped the rail. "Observe, beneath the wax lies a trace of resin, likely a compound used by metal workers to affix fittings temporarily. Combined with wax, it forms a bond that resists even heavy winds. Our tinsmith's hand is unmistakable." Sir Jasper cursed softly. "Then Kettridge fixed some contrivance here. By heaven, I shall have him arrested at dawn." Holmes raised a hand. "Patience, Sir Jasper. To seize him alone is to pluck a leaf and leave the root untouched. Tonight, I believe we may coax the tree entire into view." The hours crept by with agonizing slowness. At intervals, Holmes would ascend to the gallery and sweep the sea with a small field glass he had borrowed from Sir Jasper. At one such moment he beckoned me urgently. Through the swirling mist I discerned a dark blot upon the waters, a vessel, the same grey phantom as before, rising and falling upon the swell, her sails reefed close. She hovered like a predator waiting for the signal of prey. Holmes's voice was taut with suppressed excitement. "There is our confederate, Watson. She keeps her distance, trusting that at the appointed hour the light shall falter, and a message blaze where none should be. Let her wait. We must see who on land conspires to answer her." Back within the tower, Holmes whispered instructions to each of us. Hobbs was to remain below, Carter midway on the stair, Sir Jasper stationed at the base of the ladder to block escape. Lestrade, though grumbling, agreed to take post in the service room with me. Holmes himself placed a dark cloak about his shoulders and melted into the shadows near the lantern door, as still as a carved figure of stone. The storm raged on. Midnight tolled faintly from the distant town, its strokes muffled by the wind. I confess my heart thudded like a drum, and even Lestrade, for all his scepticism, sat rigid, his eyes darting at every creak of the iron. Then at length came the sound, a faint metallic scrape upon the gallery above. I started, but Holmes's hand shot up in warning. We listened breathlessly as the scrape was followed by a cautious tap, then the soft click of metal upon metal. Holmes moved noiselessly, crouched by the rail. Through the glow of the lantern I glimpsed a gaunt figure stooping at the door. A man in a sodden coat, his whiskered face partially obscured by a cap drawn low. In his hands he carried a small contrivance of metal and glass, its sides glistening with moisture. He pressed it against the rail, securing it swiftly with the aid of a waxy paste. For an instant the lantern's beam was interrupted, its blaze narrowed to a slit before Holmes sprang. With the suddenness of lightning, he seized the man's wrist, wrenching the device free. The fellow gave a hoarse cry and struggled with desperate strength, but in an instant Lestrade and I had flung ourselves upon him, dragging him down to the floor. He fought like a madman, cursing in a rough seaman's brogue, until Sir Jasper thundered up the stair and with his great bulk pinned him fast. Holmes, panting but triumphant, held aloft the object, a small lantern shield ingeniously fashioned to clamp upon the rail, its inner panel painted with a reflective surface to cast a narrow beam seawards. "Behold, gentlemen," he cried, "the very signal instrument. Affixed in the brief moment of darkness, it would have flashed a message of precise measure to the waiting ship. Cutter discovered it, and for his fidelity paid with his life." Lestrade stared, his face pale with astonishment. "By thunder, Holmes, I'll never call your theories fanciful again. This is proof enough to hang him." The prisoner glared with sullen hatred, his chest heaving. "You meddling devil!" he spat at Holmes. "You've spoiled the finest haul this coast has seen in 20 years. But you'll not have the rest of 'em. They'll slip your net yet." Holmes bent close, his voice low and cutting. "On the contrary, Kettridge, your vessel waits even now, and by dawn she will find not contraband awaiting her, but the armed hand of the law. Your silence will not save them." Sir Jasper's face was grim with satisfaction. "I shall telegraph the Coast Guard at once. The scoundrels shall be caught red-handed." Holmes checked him with a gesture. "Not yet. We must handle this delicately. The vessel expects a signal. Let us contrive to give one of our own. With this device we may lure them to the shallows, where the Coast Guard may fall upon them unawares. A false beacon, Watson, may yet serve to bring the guilty into our grasp." As the storm howled about the iron tower and the sea thundered at its base, I felt the drama reach its height. We had seized the hand that slew Cutter, yet the greater design still lay hidden upon the waves. Holmes's eyes shone with the fire of battle, and I knew that the night was far from over. The lantern blazed steady above us, but below, upon the restless waters, fate itself seemed to wait for the next flicker of its light. The prisoner was secured with stout rope in the lower chamber, where Carter and Hobbs kept uneasy watch upon him. His curses, muffled by the thickness of the walls, rose now and again like the groaning of the storm itself. Meanwhile, Holmes, with that concentrated air which marked his most perilous enterprises, laid the captured signalling device upon the service table and bent over it with his lens. The lantern flame flickered upon the polished metal, and I saw how cleverly the contrivance had been fashioned. A curved plate, lined with a mirror, a slit aperture adjustable by screw, and hinges designed to clasp the rail of the gallery with remarkable firmness. "It is the work of no common rogue," Holmes said, turning it over with delicate fingers. "Here is the mind of a craftsman, Watson, one who marries skill in metal with knowledge of maritime signals. Observe these grooves upon the inner plate. By sliding the panel thus, he might flash dots or dashes in mimicry of Morse, visible for miles across the water. To intercept so fine a device is rare fortune indeed." Sir Jasper bent low, his face dark with anger. "Then Cutter died for having stood faithful at his post, because he stumbled upon this devilry?" "Unquestionably," Holmes replied. "The contusion upon his temple was likely from a sudden blow. Perhaps the iron frame itself in the struggle. But mark me, Sir Jasper, Kettridge is but an arm. There is a head behind this, a brain that conceives the plan, secures the vessel, and sets these poor devils to their work. Tonight we may draw it into the open." Lestrade shifted uneasily. "And pray, how do you mean to do that? We've caught the fellow with the goods. Best to clap him in irons and be done." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Would you net a single fish when a shoal swims beneath you? No, Lestrade. With this contrivance we shall give our adversaries the signal they expect. Let them creep close in confidence, and then, with the Coast Guard lying in wait, we shall close the net entire." The inspector muttered, but made no further protest, cowed perhaps by the clarity of Holmes's reasoning. Sir Jasper at once dispatched a coded message by runner to the nearest telegraph, instructing the Coast Guard cutter to lurk behind the Goodwin Sands and await our signal. Meanwhile, Holmes rehearsed his plan with meticulous care. Carter was to release the false beacon under his direction, flashing a simple sequence to lure the smugglers shoreward. At the same moment, Sir Jasper's men would block the causeway, cutting off escape by land. Lestrade and I were to remain at Holmes's side, ready for whatever desperate stroke might follow. The hours dragged heavily. I remember the lantern chamber growing oppressively close, its great glass panels rattling under the assault of the wind. Below, the tide thundered at the causeway, flinging spray high upon the rocks. Yet within, all was tense silence, broken only by the occasional scrape of Holmes's pen, as he noted the exact angles of the device. At last he straightened, his eyes alight. "The hour approaches. Watson, train your gaze seaward. If they watch as I believe, they will soon betray themselves." It was near 2 o'clock when Hobbs, stationed at the lower window, called up in a voice choked with excitement, "A light, sir! Off to the east! She's there again!" I hurried to the gallery. Sure enough, through the rack of rain, a grey shape hovered, her mast swaying like a dark finger against the foam. Presently a faint gleam winked from her side, once, twice, thrice. Holmes gave a low exclamation of triumph. "They ask for the answering signal. Quick, Carter, affix the device. Let us play their game." With practised calm, Holmes fitted the shield to the rail. He adjusted the aperture, then, with a measured hand, released 3 deliberate flashes into the darkness. The effect was immediate. From the vessel came a flurry of answering gleams, hurried, eager, like the wagging of a dog's tail. Then, as we watched, the ship crept closer, her grey hull sliding across the waves with ghostly stealth. Sir Jasper's breath hissed between his teeth. "By heaven, they take the bait!" Holmes remained composed, though his eyes glittered with fierce light. "Steady, gentlemen. Patience is our ally. Let them come within the shoal's embrace. The Coast Guard lies ready to strike." Minutes passed, each stretched taut as wire. The vessel edged nearer, her sails reefed to slow her progress. At length a boat was lowered, a dark blot against the foam, manned by 4 figures pulling hard for the causeway. As they neared, we could hear the dip of oars, the creak of thole-pins, and snatches of muttered speech borne faintly by the gale. Holmes's hand gripped my arm. "Now, Watson, we shall see the master of this plot." The boat scraped upon the shingle. 2 men leapt out, dragging a heavy chest between them, while a third steadied the craft. The fourth, taller than the rest, strode up the causeway with confident step, his head thrust forward against the wind. Even at a distance, there was an air of command in his posture that set him apart from his rough companions. Sir Jasper stiffened beside me. "By all that's holy, it is Belchamber!" The name struck me with astonishment, yet as the tall figure drew nearer, the lamplight confirmed it beyond doubt. The florid face, the heavy watch-chain glinting even in the storm, it was indeed the shipping magnate whose protests had rung so loudly in his drawing-room. Holmes's lips curved in a thin smile. The brain reveals itself at last. The smugglers had scarcely set foot upon the stones when a shrill whistle split the air. From the shadows of the shore burst a squad of coast guards, lanterns flaring, cutlasses gleaming. A cry of alarm arose from the smugglers, but before they could retreat, Sir Jasper's men closed behind them, hemming them in. The chest fell with a crash, bursting open to reveal a glitter of foreign spirits and casks of contraband. Belchamber's face drained of colour. He wheeled about, seeking escape, but Lestrade and I barred his way, pistols drawn. "In the Queen's name, sir," cried Lestrade with sudden authority, "you are taken!" The magnate's bluster deserted him. He sagged against the spray-lashed wall, his lips moving soundlessly. Holmes stepped forward, his voice calm yet inexorable. "The lantern, the wax, the ship, the tinsmith. Every link led here, Mr. Belchamber. The death of Cutter was the seal upon your crime. The game is finished." The tumult subsided as the smugglers were bound and the contraband secured. The storm still raged, but within the circle of lantern light it seemed as though justice had imposed its own stern order upon the chaos of the night. Holmes, his cloak whipping about him, gazed down at the captive magnate with a look of cold triumph. "Watson," he murmured, "it is a singular thing, is it not, that the very light Belchamber sought to darken has become the beacon of his ruin?" The sea was still raging when the prisoners were marched to the lower chamber of the lighthouse, their wrists bound and their faces set in expressions of either sullenness or despair. The chest of contraband had been dragged in after them, its broken lid spilling bottles that clinked with a mocking gaiety at odds with the storm outside. Belchamber, however, bore himself with a curious mixture of defiance and dread. His eyes roved restlessly about the iron room, as though searching for some means of escape, yet every line of his posture betrayed the crushing weight of discovery. Holmes stood apart, his arms folded, his gaze fixed upon the shipping magnate, with the cold detachment of a man who has drawn his net and knows the fish cannot slip through. Lestrade, flushed with triumph now that the danger had passed, busied himself with noting down particulars. "It is a clear case," he declared, his voice swelling with satisfaction. "Caught in the act of smuggling, contraband in hand, accomplices beside him, and evidence of tampering with the light. There'll be no wriggling out of this one, Mr. Holmes." Holmes made a small, almost imperceptible gesture of dissent. "It is clear, Lestrade, but clarity must not be confused with completeness. To convict a man of smuggling is one thing, to connect him beyond doubt with Cutter's death is another. The one crime is upon the table before us, the other is locked still within the recesses of this man's mind." Belchamber's voice rang out suddenly, hoarse yet resonant. "I tell you, Cutter's death was no
Murder! I never struck him. He was in my way. But it was Ketteridge who dealt with him. I had no part in it." From his corner, the tinsmith gave a snarl of rage, struggling against his bonds. "Lies! You set me to it. You said the keeper would ruin us all if he raised alarm." Holmes stepped forward swiftly, his sharp gaze darting from one to the other. So, the mask begins to slip. Ketteridge, in his fury, blurts truth enough to damn his master. And you, Belchamber, in your eagerness to shield yourself, fling the blow upon your tool. Between you, the rope is braided. Sir Jasper struck the table with his fist. "By heaven, this wrangling convinces me more than any contraband chest. Cutter was murdered, and these villains are both guilty." Yet Holmes raised his hand for silence. His tone was colder than the wind shrieking outside. "Not so fast, Sir Jasper. Justice must not be content with clamour. We must know not only that Cutter died by violence, but precisely how. His body bore no mark save the bruise at the temple. If a mere blow felled him, why was there no struggle? Cutter was a man of strength, accustomed to peril. He would not succumb so easily." He turned to the table where the signalling device still lay. "Consider this contrivance. When Cutter confronted Ketteridge, if confrontation there was, did he receive a blow? Or did he, in the very act of grasping this device, inhale something noxious, a vapour released by the resin or wax used to fix it? The faint odour of tar, we noticed, may have cloaked a more subtle poison. It would act swiftly, leaving no trace but the frozen mask of fear upon his features. A man may be slain as effectively by vapour as by blade." A silence followed, broken only by the storm. I felt a chill despite the lantern's steady blaze. The notion of an invisible death that left no wound struck deeper than any dagger. Belchamber's colour faded, while Ketteridge's eyes widened with alarm. Holmes's voice hardened. "Ketteridge, you are a smith, skilled in compounds. Did you concoct such a mixture at Belchamber's order? Speak, for your life may depend upon it." The prisoner wavered, his mouth opening and shutting like that of a fish caught upon a line. At last he stammered, I only did as I was told. He bade me mix a resin to hold the shield fast. He said naught of poison, but when Cutter reeled back, when he gasped, I knew then it was more than wax and tar. The master planned it, not I." Belchamber sprang up, his face distorted by fear and fury. "Liar, you contrived it yourself. I ordered no such thing. You sought to rid us of Cutter, and now fasten your guilt upon me." Holmes's eyes never left him. "Enough. Between your protests and your accomplice's confession, the truth lies plain. Belchamber, you devised the scheme, knowing Cutter's zeal would foil your enterprise. Ketteridge fashioned the instrument, ignorant perhaps of the fatal properties he mixed.
Cutter, loyal to his charge, perished because he stood in the way of your gain." Lestrade drew himself up, his voice quivering with official gravity. "I shall take them both in charge. They will answer before the courts, and Cutter's ghost shall be avenged." Holmes inclined his head, though his expression remained grave. "Do so. Yet remember, Lestrade, it is the chain of reasoning, not the chest of liquor, that convicts men of murder. See that your evidence follows the links I have laid out. Without it, Belchamber will bleat of smuggling alone, and Cutter's sacrifice will be for naught." Sir Jasper, who had listened with clenched jaw, now spoke with heavy solemnity. "Mr. Holmes, you have done a service not only to Trinity House, but to every seaman who trusts his life to our lights. Cutter shall not be forgotten, nor shall your name." Holmes gave a faint smile, though his eyes were shadowed. "I seek not remembrance, Sir Jasper, but truth, and truth we have, though dearly bought." As the dawn broke grey over the storm-lashed sea, the prisoners were led away under guard, their figures dwindling along the causeway. The lantern above still blazed with steady light, casting its reassurance over the restless waters. I looked at Holmes, standing silent and aloof, and felt once more that peculiar blend of awe and melancholy which his triumphs so often left in their wake. For though the net had closed and the guilty stood unmasked, the thought of Cutter's lonely vigil and sudden death lingered in my mind like a tolling bell, and Holmes, whose genius had unravelled the mystery, seemed himself touched by the solemnity of a light extinguished too soon. The storm had blown itself weary by the time the prisoners were marched inland, leaving behind a restless hush over sea and land. The gulls wheeled low, their cries sharp against the still air, and the tide lapped with a subdued insistence at the stones of the causeway. Holmes and I lingered upon the headland with Sir Jasper, who had insisted on seeing the last of his men's duty carried out. Lestrade had gone with the party to Broadstairs, his sense of authority now greatly magnified, and the lighthouse keepers had resumed their watch, shaken but resolute. The steady beam swept its accustomed arc across the horizon, as though declaring that the night's profanation had been but a passing shadow. Holmes stood apart, his gaze fixed upon the horizon, his profile sharp against the morning light. He drew at his pipe in silence, yet I could sense that his mind had not released its grip upon the case. For myself, I was convinced that Belchamber's guilt was manifest. He had been taken red-handed, his confederates exposed, and even the tinsmith's angry outburst had tied him to the crime. Yet Holmes's silence gave me pause, for I had learned by long experience that such quietude masked not satisfaction, but doubt. At length I ventured, "You are not content, Holmes?" He turned, slowly, his eyes narrowing as though testing the thought before uttering it. "Content, Watson? I am never content until every thread lies smooth and every knot is untied. Consider, my dear fellow, Belchamber was heavy-handed, blustering and careless. He contrived a smuggling venture with some ingenuity, it is true. But would a man of his temperament conceive so subtle a plan as the poisoning resin? He had the money, the motive, yes. But has he the mind? I was taken aback. Surely the evidence speaks plainly. Cutter dies in the instant of discovering the device. The resin was prepared under his order. Kettridge himself admitted as much. Holmes's smile was faint, almost pitying. Kettridge admitted nothing of the sort. He shifted blame in desperation, speaking of wax and tar, hinting at poison only when I placed the notion before him. Belchamber raged like a cornered bull, but his surprise seemed genuine. "No, Watson, I suspect we have netted the body of the fish, but the head may yet lurk unseen in the deeps." Sir Jasper, who had listened intently, frowned. If not Belchamber, then who? Cutter had no enemies that I know of. The assistants are loyal lads. Who else could have profited? Holmes tapped the ash from his pipe with a slow, deliberate motion. That is the question which remains, for Cutter's death was not inevitable. Smuggling has stained these shores for centuries, yet seldom has a keeper been slain. Why now? Why by such elaborate contrivance? The answer, I think, lies not upon the sea, but within the councils of commerce and authority. Someone who knew the working of the light, who knew also of Belchamber's desperation, seized the moment to further his own design. We walked slowly back toward the inn, the path crunching beneath our boots. Holmes spoke little, though his eyes roved ceaselessly, as though every chalk pebble and bent blade of grass might carry its own message. At the inn, he seated himself with pen and paper, writing a series of letters with that rapid certainty which told me each word was already complete in his mind before the nib touched the page. One was addressed to Scotland Yard, another to Trinity House, and a third, most curiously, to a private firm of chemical analysts in London. When he had sealed them, he sat back, his long fingers steepled. "These will set wheels in motion, Watson. Until they return, we must hold our judgment in abeyance. Evidence is a delicate flower. It withers when plucked too soon." The day passed slowly. Sir Jasper, impatient for resolution, made several attempts to draw Holmes into discussion, but he received little in return save for an occasional remark about tides or the peculiarities of resin when mixed with paraffin. For myself, I felt the weight of unfinished business pressing heavily. The image of Cutter lying stiff upon the grating haunted me still, and I longed to hear Holmes pronounce the mystery solved in full. Evening found us once more at the lighthouse, where the keepers greeted us with anxious respect. Hobbs confided that the men feared reprisals from the smugglers' fellows, but Holmes reassured him with a grave courtesy that carried conviction. As the light was trimmed and set for the night, Holmes examined again the gallery rail, his lens glinting in the lamplight. He scraped away another minute fragment of residue, securing it carefully in a small vial. His expression betrayed neither triumph nor disappointment, but only that profound concentration which I had come to recognize as the herald of revelation. As we descended, the wind brought with it the faint toll of a buoy bell far out to sea. Holmes paused upon the stair, listening with an intensity that made me hold my breath. When at last he spoke, it was scarcely above a whisper. "Watson, do you not feel it? The case is not yet finished. The sea hides more than contraband tonight. Before another dawn, I fear we may face a danger greater than any we have yet encountered." Sir Jasper looked startled, but Holmes offered no further explanation. Instead, he bade us return to the inn, where he paced the floor like a caged animal until near midnight. At last he halted, his eyes gleaming with sudden resolve. "Tomorrow," he said, "we go to London. There is one man whose hand I fancy I can already discern behind this affair. If I am correct, Cutter's death was but the first ripple of a larger tide. To expose it, we must follow the current to its source. Come, Watson, sleep if you can, for the morrow will demand your utmost vigilance." I obeyed, though sleep came fitfully, broken by dreams of wavering lantern beams and shadowy figures upon storm-tossed seas. When I awoke, the pale light of dawn showed Holmes already dressed, his eyes alight with that keen fire which meant that the game, far from ending, had only entered upon its most dangerous stage. The morning train bore us to London, the river dull and smoke dragging low along the roofs. Holmes lost no motion between Charing Cross and Baker Street. Within the hour he had us in a hansom to rooms off Giltspur Street, where a spectacled analyst awaited. "Mr. Holmes," said he, "your samples arrived at dawn. The residue from the lantern rail is chiefly shellac and rosin, with a volatile solvent. There is also a faint but decisive reaction for hydrocyanic acid. Chloroform is present in notable quantity." Holmes's eyes brightened. "Shellac to hold, chloroform to daze, prussic acid to finish, and the match-head fragment. a copper salt with barium, Swedish Vesuvians. The green head is diagnostic. Back in the cab, Holmes tapped a finger upon his knee. You see the hand, Watson? Not Bellchambers. The mind that mixed that paste had access to laboratories and to Trinity House stores. You speak of Inspector Varley, I said. Varley inspected North Foreland 3 weeks before the crime, Holmes returned. He signed off repairs. To the ventilator cowling Ketteridge's pretext for return, he knows the rotor and can admit a workman without question. Let us follow the river to his door. We followed it to a ship chandler's in Wapping. A clerk produced ledgers at Holmes's request, while Lestrade, summoned by telegram, glowered at our elbows. Holmes's finger ran down cramped columns until it halted. Lamp cement, shellac flakes, rosin, Swedish matches, 1 case. Purchaser, T. Varley, cash, delivery, Tower Hill. Clerk, what manner of man? Civil gentleman with a seaman's tongue, said he. Showed a Trinity House card. Lestrade whistled. By George, that pins him. Nay, Holmes said, pins require a board. We must have admission and motive. Bellchamber supplied gold and vessel. Varley supplied chemistry and access. What bought a Trinity inspector? Debt or fear. From Wapping we drove to Tower Hill. An usher told us Varley had not come in, and Sir Jasper remained in Kent. Holmes left a note and drew me away. The fish will not take a hook it sees, he murmured. We must let the stream sweep him into our net. Lestrade, oblige me with this telegram, in the name of Bellchamber's confidential man. He scribbled, Ketteridge breaking, will speak tonight at Limehouse stairs. Bring money and papers, no police. At dusk the fog thickened. The river became a whispering thing. Holmes vanished an hour and returned a hulking waterman, jaw bandaged, moustache blackened. We took our stand among bales. Lestrade and 2 yardmen lurked behind timber. The tide sucked at the steps with a slurp. A figure came down the alley, slim, a clerk's neatness, shabby at the cuffs. He paused, descended 2 steps. The pale face turned to the river light. Holmes moved from shadow with a limping gait and a muffled oath in Dealman's patter. You're late, Gov. The smith's tongue's loose, wants his share and a passage to Holland. Says the paste weren't just wax, says the keeper smelt almonds as he dropped. The man started, then forced a laugh. What is that to me? You have the papers? Holmes tapped his breast. Safe and dearer. Word is the house is stirring. Elder brothers dislike lanterns going dark. Composure cracked. He edged closer, breath hissing. Keep your voice down. Give me the papers and you shall be paid. And the widow's fee? Holmes breathed. For Cutter's widow. You promised the smith. The hand flinched, not outward, but inward, as if to still a memory. In that instant Holmes dropped the limp, straightened to his full height, and the lamp caught his eyes like steel. Jeremiah Ketteridge never spoke of almonds. I did, but you remember them because you mixed them. Thomas Varley, I arrest you for conspiracy and the murder of James Cutter. He sprang like a rat, darted up the steps and ran. Lestrade burst from cover with a shout. I followed, lungs afire. Varley swerved along the quay, vaulted a hawser, and would have vanished into a fog-dim court had not Holmes, by prescience, taken the shorter line and met him at the mouth. Varley struck. Holmes parried. We closed and brought him down among coils of wet rope. He fought with dry-eyed fury that told of sleepless nights. When the irons were on him and his breath came in shuddering draughts, Holmes spoke low. Why, Varley? He stared at the black water. Because they would have broken me, he said. Bellchamber had my notes, debts, signatures. He promised release if I served. When the keeper crossed us, he said the sea buries secrets. I knew the pastes from lantern work. I made it quick. Holmes's face did not change. You made it cowardly. Lestrade, take him. Tomorrow we lay the ledger, the ink, and the river's slime before the magistrate. We drove back through a city that seemed to hold its breath. In Baker Street, Holmes stood long at the window, listening to late cabs and a newsboy's cry. At length he turned with his ironic gentleness. "The case is not yet ended, Watson. A truth must be made plain in Kent, and a light trimmed for a dead man. Then we may close the shutters." The trial of Horace Belchamber and Thomas Varley stirred London with talk of corruption upon the seas. Yet the clamour mattered little to Holmes, who returned to Baker Street with his usual disdain for the world's applause. The newspapers, eager for sensation, proclaimed him the saviour of the lighthouse service, while Lestrade basked in reflected glory. But within our familiar sitting-room, Holmes sat in his armchair, fingers steepled, a faint smile curving his lips at the folly of public opinion. "You see, Watson," he said, "the chain of reasoning is everything." To the crowd, Belchamber was already guilty the moment contraband clattered onto the shingle, but guilt without logic is no more than guesswork. It was Varley's resin that mattered, his laboratory skill, his knowledge of the lantern's inner parts. Had we not pressed further, Cutter's death might have passed as accident, and the true hand behind it left to repeat the crime. I shook my head in wonder. And yet Belchamber too was guilty. Without his wealth and desperation, the plot could not have been attempted. Holmes inclined his head. Precisely. He was the financier and the visible rogue. But Varley, cloaked in respectability, was the subtler danger. The union of bluster and brains is often more formidable than either alone. It is only when we separate the strands that justice is served. I could not restrain a sigh. Poor Cutter! His devotion cost him dearly. Holmes's gaze softened, though his voice remained cool. He was a brave man, Watson, braver than those who betrayed his trust. Yet his death was not meaningless. By uncovering the truth, we ensure that the light he tended shall blaze without interruption, a beacon for thousands. That, perhaps, is the finest epitaph a keeper could ask. For a while we sat in silence, the fire crackling softly, the fog pressing close against the windows. At length I ventured, "You look tired, Holmes. Surely you will allow yourself some rest now that the case is concluded?" He gave a short laugh, the familiar spark of irony lighting his features. "Rest, my dear fellow. The world does not cease its mischief because one light burns steady. There are always shadows enough to occupy me. But come, there is no need for you to forfeit a night's peace. Write your account, as you always do, and let the tale remind you that even in the storm's darkest hour, the flame of reason may yet prevail." I obeyed, though my pen faltered more than once, for the image of the lantern tower in the gale, its beam cut off for 7 dreadful minutes, a faithful keeper lying lifeless within, returned to me with startling vividness. Yet as I set down Holmes's final deductions, I felt that curious mingling of awe and reassurance which his triumphs always brought. He had wrestled order from chaos, logic from seeming impossibility, and in so doing had preserved the honour of those who serve unseen. When at last I laid aside my pen, Holmes had already closed his eyes, his face composed, his long hands folded upon his breast as though in meditation. The firelight glinted upon the violin lying ready at his side, a silent promise of music to come. Outside, London's ceaseless murmur rose and fell, heedless of the quiet victory won in its name. And so ended the matter of the murder in the lantern-room, one more page in that singular chronicle of my friend's genius, wherein brilliance shone all the brighter against the fog of human folly.